Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And tonight we welcome back friend of the show, Connor Newcomb, the host of Locked On Orioles, to discuss the current state of the Orioles in this roller coaster of emotions that has been the month of September. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of 200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unblind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. And as we like to do at the top of every episode, we want to welcome some new members of our Patreon community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob, who has 2 new members to shout out tonight.
Yeah, it's always appreciated to have people come up, sign up to Patreon and support us, but especially this time of year in the last month of the season before the playoffs. It's a grind. We're all feeling it, so definitely appreciate the support. Evan Jones, who signed up for a year up front at the AAA level. Awesome. Greatly appreciated. And RW signed up as a AA member, which don't know what RW stands for, but can only imagine it's Ryan Watson down in San Francisco wanting to keep up with his old gang. So appreciate it, guys.
With that, now I'll introduce tonight's guest. He is a frequent guest of ours and the host of Locked On Orioles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. He is Connor Newcomb. Connor, good to have you back on.
Yeah, it is fantastic to be back. You mentioned we're going to talk about the current state of the Orioles. Could we potentially, I know this is not my show, could we potentially talk about like the June state of the Orioles? I feel like the comment section would be much nicer to all of us. Maybe the May state of the Orioles, maybe the mid 2023 state of the Orioles. People are not having a good time out there. So let's try to give them a good time on this episode.
So 2025. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting right now. A little rough times ever since, I don't know. I guess it was July after that tough June schedule. We survived that, but it might have killed us for the rest of the regular season. Hopefully the fresh start we can regroup.
Well, the Orioles right now, unfortunately, as much as I would love to go back in time, these are the Orioles as we see them right now. 86 and 70, 6 games behind the Yankees, coming off a series against the Detroit Tigers in which they lost 2-3. Granted, Detroit is one of the hottest teams in baseball right now, and those games were close, but they were frustrating because they were kind of a reminder of what this team could do last year, coming from behind to win games, and they seem incapable of doing this year, dropping a 6-4 contest in extra innings on Saturday, and then losing a 1-run affair by 4-3 in Sunday's finale. And Saturday, especially, first and second, no one or 2 runners on, no outs, bottom of the ninth, winning run 90 feet away, can't get the run across. That was the kind of thing that seemingly never happened in 2023. And now it just kind of manifests as a moment where you can capture the frustrations of the 2024 Orioles in 1 inning. So, Connor, with that, how are you holding up?
With that, how's it going? The YouTube comment section at Locked On Orioles is a nightmare currently. So that's a tough place. I definitely haven't been on Twitter in about 3 months. I can only imagine what's going on over there. For me, it's weird. There are people fully on the side of the Orioles are not making the playoffs. I will stake my claim that the Orioles are making the playoffs. They have a 99.9% chance via Fangraphs. The magic number is 2. You essentially have to win 1 game for the rest of the year. If you just beat the Twins 1 time, you're going to be in the playoffs. So if you told a team, hey, you need to go 1-5 in your next 6 games to clinch the playoffs, it's a pretty good spot to be in. And weirdly enough, through all this terrible stuff, they have restarted their not being swept streak. Despite the terrible baseball they have played at times, they actually have not been swept since the All-Star break. So that at least makes me feel good enough that, hey, it probably won't happen this week and they'll get into the playoffs. Saturday was so interesting because Thursday with the Santander walk-off felt like this could spark them, and they played their best game in a while on Friday. I mean, they hit 5 homers for the first time all year, which I couldn't believe. And yeah, getting healthy is the other big thing too. You could see Coulomb and Webb were back. Westberg and Arias on the precipice. They come back Sunday. You're like, this could kickstart them. They get the walk-off. They get a great burn start. They hit all the home runs. They look like the early season Orioles on Friday. And then Saturday in the ninth inning, they look like last year's Orioles. I was trying to go back and find when was the last time 4 consecutive Orioles reached base in the ninth inning? Like it may have been May or April. And that's what the O's did to start that ninth. And they just couldn't get that one final hit. And all of a sudden, it's back to, they're not playing unwatchable baseball, but it's back to just can't get the big swing. And they lose 2 games in a row, and you kind of feel like you're right back to where you were. So I think John Mioli's piece in the Banner on Monday was really good about how this team is now different with Westberg and Arias in there. The lineup is nearly as long as it was early in the year. So I want to see a little more sample size with that. We'll get 7 games of that before we get to the postseason, but I feel a little better offensively. The pitching is not what it was a couple of weeks ago. Albert Suarez has really hit a rut here. He's starting to, all his home run luck has left him. I don't know. I feel better than I feel like the average online Orioles fan, but then again, that's not real life. And there were 40,000 people in the stadium on Sunday, and probably most of them don't feel like the people that are in my YouTube comments right now, but that's kind of my world. So I feel like I'm being more glass half full than the average person, but I would just like to get the playoffs clinched, because then I feel like the O's can just reset themselves and focus on next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I think that would be good for Orioles fans as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. After Friday, like you said, come back from behind on Thursday, just put our awesome complete game on Friday. I'm like, we're back. We're all the way back, getting healthy. Urias and Westberg right around the corner. Then to lose that heartbreaker on Saturday, and then Sunday 0 for 8 runners in scoring position, another close competitive game. It feels like we're getting closer and closer for a team that's lost 5 consecutive series so far, going into the last week of the season. I feel pretty confident that with the fresh start in the playoffs, you got Westberg and Arias back this weekend. Mountcastle hopefully can do enough to earn his way onto the wild card roster. You feel like the offense will be in the best place it's been in quite a while. Pitching's been solid. So anything can happen in the playoffs. I don't know if any team is like, we're the favorites to win it all. Nothing could stop us. I don't know if there's a team out there like that. So get in, get healthy, and get hot. I think that was your motto, Connor, and I have to agree with it. I'm still sitting in the same spot.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know. I know a couple weeks ago we were talking about this team, and it's like, oh, Danny Coulomb and Jacob Webb will be back. That will help solidify the pitching. And now they're back. And then you see Ramon Arias and Jordan Westberg both had like home runs in their rehab outings before they came back up. So that was good to see. And now it does, like you guys mentioned, with the lineup being longer, and it feels like more like early season Orioles lineup again. And they could spark something like we talked about last week with Kerstad coming back, and then Westberg and Urias. It's like just throw everything at a wall and see what sticks, and hopefully someone's going to spark something. Although part of me, and the YouTube commenter part of me, is like, if Santander, that walk-off hit, that walk-off home run, and then that game Friday, and if that can't spark this team, I don't know what can. But I do feel pretty optimistic in that I don't have any more expectations. Like, I feel like that's just been the best way to go. Like, I know I pulled it up here. Let me pull it up here. The playoff bracket, MLB.com. Like, as of right now, playoff bracket has Orioles versus Royals. Winner gets the Yankees. I don't care what the bracket looks like. At this point, I don't care if it's Royals, Yankees, the Orioles have to go through. Just get into the playoffs and see what happens. Last year, everybody talked about this to death. Texas winning this thing, the Texas-Arizona World Series last year, just get in, anything can happen. That's where I'm truly at this point. I don't know if you guys are hoping for a certain bracket to shake out, or is it just the same, like, just get in this thing and let's roll, hopefully win.
Yeah, I don't care who we play. I mean, I'd obviously not like to get bounced by the Royals again after 2014, but screw it. Let's get in there, give it our best shot. It can't be worse than last year's, 3 and out. So I guess it could, but hopefully it's not.
If you had asked me that before this past weekend, I would have said I would have wanted to avoid Kansas City because it felt like if there is a weakness of Royals that any team can exploit, it's the Orioles' inability to control the run game, and Kansas City feels very well suited to exploit that. And it's especially critical when the offense isn't going right now. So those 1 or 2 games that they get, or those 1 or 2 runs that they get on a guy taking an extra base or stealing a base are going to matter a lot more. Now, though, Detroit scares me. The way that they've played over the last month, their pitching staff looks really good. I think right now I would rather face Kansas City than Detroit, but ask me again in 3 days because my answer might be entirely different.
I'm with Nick. I don't think it really matters, especially because they're still not clinched yet. I mean, you can talk yourselves into the Orioles losing to and beating any of these teams, especially in a best of 3 series. I mean, the margins are so thin. This is still a good, talented baseball team on both sides in any of those series. You look at the Royals, you could say, oh, they could, run all over. Bobby Witt could get on. They could steal bases. They could do all the stuff that happened in 2014. The Orioles won both of those series against the Royals, but that was very early in the year before the Royals really got going. The Royals were pesky, like really, really pesky in those 2 series. And I said it afterwards. I didn't think the Royals were going to be where they are right now. I thought they'd be, a 75 to 80 win team. And I was just like, I'm happy the O's don't have to see this team again. Well, now they might have to, but they've also lost 7 in a row. And you want to talk about the Orioles not being able to hit. The Royals can't hit at all right now. They lost Vinny Pasquantino, and Bobby Witt has stopped hitting 500, which is probably part of this, but they can't hit at all. You look at the Twins. I mean, that team's a disaster right now. I have no idea what's going on in Minnesota. They've got the best amount of talent of all these teams, and Vivek is a good point here. I mean, you're facing the Tigers or Twins. You have seen them recently. I mean, hell, you could play the Twins for 3 games, get a day off, and play them for 3 more. That's certainly a possibility, especially if it doesn't go well in Minnesota. The Tigers, Jim Palmer talks about it a lot. These 2 teams are going to have a lot of data on each other from very recently. You could talk yourself into the Tigers like, hey, they feel like the Orioles the last 2 years. They don't know what's right, don't know what's wrong. They're just putting it out there. And then you could get into the postseason, have all these guys who have never played in the playoffs, and they could just kind of crumble like Baltimore did last year. That's certainly a possibility. So you can talk yourself into beating any of these teams, even the teams that are going to get buys. The Guardians, who knows what their starting rotation is going to be. I mean, that's one of the rotations that's in a worse spot than the Orioles are in right now, rotation-wise. So, yeah, their bullpen's nasty, but you get an early lead on them, and you kind of neutralize that bullpen. And, yeah, the Yankees are the Yankees, but the Orioles are 6-4 against the Yankees this year. So you can talk yourself into anything. I'm just get into the playoffs. Maybe it's even better that it's a 2 out of 3 in the first round, because the O's are already lined up to have Eflin Burns go in games 1 and 2. They don't even have to mix things around, which I think gives them a nice advantage, because say they play the Tigers. If the Tigers have to fight till the final day to get in, they're going to throw Skubal on Sunday. And that would be very helpful. Even though we didn't see Skubal and we still lost both series, you'd rather avoid the AL Cy Young Award winner. So that could help the Orioles. If, say, the Royals have to get in on the last day, they'll have to throw Reagans on Sunday, which could knock him out of a wild card series. Like, all of these things could work in the Orioles' favor, which could certainly be helpful, because, again, they're going to line up Eflin and Burns, and I don't think any of the other wild card teams have the ability to just line up whoever they want in those 3 games.
Yeah. I almost feel like it would be an advantage to the Orioles, almost, even like you just saw those pitchers. If you're avoiding Skubal, again, you just saw those guys. Like, you don't have to go back and look at old film. You just experienced it a week ago, less than a week ago. So I don't know. It's going to be a fun final 6 days here of the regular season.
Orioles fans keep pointing to the Rangers as, I think, a reason for optimism, because this time last year, it was kind of a relief that the Orioles got to face the Rangers, because they were so bad at the end of the regular season. They cost themselves a division in the final weekend. But then we know what happened. The Rangers not only rolled all over the Orioles, they rolled all over everyone en route to the World Series. Let's say that the Orioles actually can do that. Let's say that they can get hot at the right time. Everything falls into place. And a team that was elite for half the season suddenly becomes elite again. What has to happen though for that? Is it matchup? Is it players getting back healthy? Is it players who've been struggling finding it? Is it a mixture of all those things? What do you think are the big factors?
I'd say it's mostly a mix. Get these guys back. Westberg and Arias are back. Hopefully, they can get loosened up, reacclimated to the speed of the major league game quick enough to. I mean, Arias should be able to. He wasn't out that long, but Westberg, you want him to get comfortable back in the majors, and get hot. Gunnar is like the only guy that's been consistent. Santander as well, but it'd be nice to have Adley shake off the second half. Maybe a fresh start will do him good. Maybe they could, if they clinch early in the week, maybe they can give him a couple extra days off later in the week. Yeah, I just think it's a mix of all those things, and yeah, that's it.
I think the O's and Rangers are even more similar than just the playing poorly at the end of the season, but still getting into the postseason, in that it's a team with two starters who, I mean, right now are pitching better than most top twos in any rotation, and Eflin and Burns. I mean, they've both got 1-something ERAs, I think, in the month of September. And then it's just a big shrug emoji afterwards in the rotation. That was the Rangers last year. Montgomery was ascending into another body in the postseason, and Eovaldi was usual postseason Eovaldi. And after that, it was just what combination of Cody Bradford and Dane Dunning and Andrew Haney and three relievers can we throw out there to get outs? That could be the Orioles. I mean, maybe you get something from Grayson, but he's certainly not going to be a starting pitcher in the postseason, I think, at this point, at least early on. So if some combo of Suarez and Kramer and Rodriguez and maybe even Cade Povich can gather outs behind Eflin and Burns, and then it's a offense just kind of lying in the weeds, waiting to strike. You had such a talented offense in Texas last year that went completely cold late in the season and just turned it on. And Garcia and Semien and really Seager just started to hit and hit and hit in the postseason. And they got big contributions from Robbie Grossman and Mitch Garver, but the Orioles have players like that too. And Gunnar and Adley and O'Hearn and maybe getting Westberg back and maybe getting Mountcastle back can just, it's not like we haven't seen it. That's the same thing with the Rangers. You saw that offense early in the season. We saw that home run heavy offense from the Orioles early in the season. You just need that to click. I think the number one thing clicking is the Orioles starting to hit the long ball again, because fine, they're not going to hit with runners in scoring position, whatever. Might change, might not. There's some luck involved there. They can start hitting the ball out of the ballpark. I mean, what teams that out-homered the opponent were like 25-2 in the postseason or something last year, or at one point last year. Like, home runs play in the postseason. There's no team better suited to hit home runs maybe than the Yankees than the Orioles are. So get back to that, find a way to hit the ball out of the ballpark. And they've got a team that's built pretty similar, honestly, to what the Rangers had last year. So you can at least see it.
I feel like the end of that discussion there is like a powder keg the last few weeks on Orioles fans online about how this team was built and they're attacking things. But I mean, you guys mentioned the pitching a couple of times here. You look at Burns, who's rebounded well. I don't think anybody sanely had any real concern about Burns when he was struggling a couple weeks ago. He figured it out. Zach Eflin, I will continue to sing the praises of that trade. Hopefully I continue to do it all next year as well. Just could turn out to be just a unbelievable deal. But who do you guys feel more confident going with game 3 right now, though? You just mentioned Suarez, and I know Connor had a great discussion segment on this morning's episode about Suarez, being that he's a fly ball pitcher and the home run rate was so good for so long this year. And it's regressed significantly lately, but given what type of pitcher he is, maybe it's some overcorrecting right now and he can get back to this happy medium. But Dean Kramer, like 6 quality starts over his last 10 outings, if I'm counting that right. He's been pretty solid lately. Is it Burns, Eflin, Suarez, or Burns, Eflin, Kramer in the playoffs? Or is anyone bold enough to want to throw Cade Povich in there for game 3?
For me, I'm leaning Kramer for game 3. He got the experience last year. Obviously, tough timing for him last year and a tough result, but he's got that experience at least. And I feel like he's been really solid in the second half with his splitter. I was at the game when he had 6 no-hit innings. I would give it to him for 2 times through the order. no more. So maybe 4 or 5 innings. Then maybe you put Povich in for one time through the order if he can manage it. Be there for a quick hook if he can't. But yeah, between Suarez and Kramer, I'm leaning Kramer right now. I know Suarez had more success out of the rotation and out of the bullpen, but I don't know. I'm going with my gut, and that's what I would do.
I think I would still lean Albert Suarez. I only say that because if you're ending up in a game 3, that's a winner take all. That means you've used Burns and Eflin in game 1 and 2. Probably they've each pitched somewhat deep into those ball games. You would hope that's what they've done most of their time with the Orioles. So you've used the bullpen certainly, but maybe not to a point where they're just dog tired in a game 3. In a winner take all game 3, I mean, all bets are off in terms of starting pitchers. So I would use the guy who gives you the most upside. And I still think that's Albert Suarez. I mean, especially if he's being asked to do no more than 2 times through the order, he can throw 75% high fastballs. And if he's locating his fastball like he did Sunday, he just couldn't locate his off speeds. That's why he gave up 3 home runs. But that every single fastball was right where he wanted it to be at the top of the zone on Sunday. And I talked about that on Monday's episode. I thought that was a really good sign, despite him not having the off speeds. If he knows he's only facing 18 batters at the most, he can pepper the top of the zone with those fastballs. And then you just turn it over to the pen. Because I think the good thing about the Orioles bullpen right now is, yes, they still don't have a clear stopper in the 9th inning. I think even with Dominguez pitching pretty well, they don't have that. What they don't have on the flip side, though, is a lot of guys who you wouldn't want to at least throw out there at some point in a postseason game. Like, I think they have a better middle of the pen, and that was really an issue parts of this year. You get Webb back, you get Coulomb back, the way Matt Bowman is pitching, you have a much better kind of squishy middle of that Orioles bullpen right now. And I think Hyde, which what he did Sunday, he used, or was that Saturday? He used a lot of pitchers and just mixed and matched the entire time. I believe it was Saturday to get that game to extra innings. He could do that again in a game 3. And hey, you know, maybe Grayson is healthy enough to throw 1 inning in the wild card series. And maybe that's when you deploy him. It would be risky, but he's one of your best pitchers if he's on your active roster. So those are all options. I just think if you're going for game 3, winner take all bets are off, starter has the quickest hook in the world, I'm going with Suarez just because. Also Kramer, I think, is much more likely than Albert Suarez to just give up a 3 spot in the 2nd inning or something. He gets hit so much harder than Suarez does. He is so much more likely for a blow up. Not that it's happened lately, but just the way he pitches, it's more likely for that to happen. He, despite Suarez's struggles lately, gives up more home runs, gives up a lot harder contact. That would just scare me a little bit with Kramer in a winner take all. Now, if you're flipping it, you're saying Dean Kramer game 3 of the ALDS when you're up 2-0. I think I maybe take Kramer over Suarez. But when it's like, get me as many outs as you can and get out of there, I'd take probably the higher upside, which is Albert Suarez right now.
And it might just depend on the matchup, like what the organization thinks whose stuff plays better against what lineup and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with Bob because, you know, my mind goes to, I agree with Connor that the upside with Suarez is greater. But Suarez just faced the Tigers. So if you do face Detroit in the wild card round, you're going to, good or bad, you're going to look at that outing that Suarez had against the Tigers, and that's going to be part of your decision. So you could look at it and say he just faced them about 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, actually. Gave up 3 home runs in 5 innings. Or he struck out 6 and walked just 1. If this time around he keeps the ball in the ballpark, he's going to be successful. And you can make an argument for or against Suarez on that basis. So I do think the matchup would have to play into it because if they play Kansas City, that's not a team that necessarily hits a lot of home runs. So maybe that comes into factors too. Now, Suarez, I should say, has, had some rough outings against teams that typically don't hit well. Gave up 3 home runs to the White Sox at the beginning of the month. The Tigers are not a power hitting team. He gave up 3 home runs to them. But if you don't think he's going to do that again, then there's a valid case for at least running him out there for 4 innings to see what he can do. I want to talk about Grayson Rodriguez for a minute because I know that we're hoping that we see him back on the mound before the season ends. But do any of you feel like maybe at this point, unless you're confident you can get quality innings from him in the playoffs, that it's time to turn the page and focus on 2025, knowing what he means to this organization long term.
Personally, I don't know. They would have. I feel like he would have been shut down if they didn't think he could help them at some point. And let's just say, hey, he won't be available unless we make the ALCS. I'm totally fine with building up towards that, because if we get there, then that's a huge piece to add that late in the game. So I'm all about just him staying ready, trying to get back. If it doesn't work out, we get bounced before he can make it back to the active roster, then so be it. Then he can kind of wind things back down. But for me, we need that Grayson Rodriguez ace in the hole if possible. I still secretly feel like if we make the World Series, Felix Bautista is gonna like make an Undertaker entrance, but that could be wishful thinking. But yeah, give me Grayson in the playoffs if possible. I'm there for the possibility for sure.
I wish MLB teams didn't have to like announce, like they could secretly deploy a Felix Bautista, just the lights go off at Camden Yards and next thing you know he comes running out. I think people would not survive that game. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of, maybe it's the conspiracy theory in part of me thinking like they're slow playing it. They're not going to release any information. We know how secretive this organization is. It's playoff time. They're going to slow play Rodriguez and work his way back here. No rehab starts with Norfolk last week. We're doing this all behind the scenes, and they are building him up back there, and hoping like maybe like Vivek's comment there, maybe he's not available in the first round, but second round, oh, he's going to start. I don't know. I don't think that's very likely, but trying to be a little optimistic here as we enter the final week of the season. But I think if anything, yeah, like if he can just give you middle relief innings, I don't even need him to be the closer. I don't even know if that's a great idea because he's never been in that role before. And I don't know if I want Grayson pitching the ninth inning in a must-win playoff game, even though he would be the most talented arm you probably have. That does concern me a little bit. But just even if he's out there to pitch a sixth inning of a game, like I'll take it at this point.
Something about it not being arm related makes me think they would push him a little bit further, just because you can take the kid's gloves off a little bit more. On the flip side, it's now an injury he's had 2 times in 3 years. So that brings the concern back up to a different level. The last update we got, I believe, was he threw another bullpen on Friday, and Hyde said he still had not faced live hitters. And there was talk, about him potentially getting a rehab start in. We know that's not going to happen. All the minor league seasons are over. So if he's going to pitch, it's going to be a lot of live BPs and building up behind the scenes. And he's built up at least enough, you would think, to throw in relief if he's throwing this many bullpens. It's just about like, is he still having discomfort after all these outings and then is feeling better? And then they're saying, all right, let's throw again. And then he's having discomfort again. That would be my guess is what's happening right now. He's not recovering like he would want to. And that's why they're not taking the next step, because it's been bullpens for a while now. Like we haven't gotten really any positive news on him in a long time. I would highly doubt, unless the Orioles maybe get to the World Series, we'd see him be a true of the word starter in the postseason. I mean, maybe he could go start a game and go one time through the lineup and then come out. But yeah, I mean, I would love for him to be in there no matter what role he's in. He's, without a doubt, one of your best 13 pitchers and probably one of your best 5 pitchers on this roster, no matter what role he's in. So he's certainly going to help you, but I just don't know their level of worry right now. And I don't think they're ever going to officially say until the Orioles are eliminated, like, hey, this is what happened, or hey, Grayson's fully shut down. I think they're always going to keep that little bit in the back of their minds, because it's not like Felix last year where he either tries to pitch or he's getting surgery. I don't think Grayson needs surgery or anything. It's just probably going to be more of a rest in the offseason kind of thing. So they're just going to keep him as an option as far as they can. I think what we'd learn a lot from is if he's not on the wild card roster, I don't think that tells us a lot, because it's 3 games, could be 2. It's not a lot of days after the regular season. But if that ALDS roster comes out and he's not on it, because, there's a couple guys at the end of your playoff bullpen you don't even use. So you've got space to put an injured guy on there if you want to use him. And if the O's get there and he's not on it, I think that would tell us a lot about where he is. And I would probably say that means he's done for 2024. But they got to get there first to even get that answer.
Is there a chance Chase McDermott could help in the bullpen? Do we see him in this final week here try to get some work since AAA Norfolk season is done? I mean, he's got the stuff.
Maybe more than Grayson. I mean, he's on a quicker timeline. He pitched in a AAA game. The issue is he was 90 to 92. And if you want Chase McDermott, and that was in a shorter stint, that was in 3 innings. If you want Chase McDermott, you want 96, 97, Chase McDermott out of the bullpen. I would say, although Chase is more built up, I would say Grayson has a better chance of pitching in the playoffs because I think with just McDermott's spot in his career and with it being a shoulder, I mean, it was kind of a weird shoulder thing, but a shoulder thing. Not sure the O's would push that for a postseason when he's made one major league appearance at this point, but it's still a pipe dream. And technically, if you're just looking at health, I guess he's closer than Grayson is.
Yeah. And like last year ended early because of the back. Well, early, like a week or so, with a back injury. I'm still, we might talk about more about this in the second episode here with the Norfolk recap with McDermott. I just feel like McDermott could enter next year with a legitimate shot at a rotation spot. And so I think, yeah, you're looking ahead to 2025 with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a healthy Chase McDermott would add a lot to this bullpen, and not necessarily the McDermott isn't healthy right now, but as Connor pointed out, the velocity was lower than we're used to seeing from him in that outing last week. So honestly, I think if there's a young player or a young pitcher that's going to be expected to pick up the load, it's going to be Cade Povich because he has finished strong. And I could see him being a pretty key piece out of the bullpen, even if he doesn't have prototypical reliever stuff. But yeah, and going back to Grayson, I agree with you guys. I think that if he doesn't make the wild card roster, that's not a big deal because at the end of the day, 2 or 3 games, but the division series would be where I would want him on the mound. And you would definitely hope that if they make the ALCS, that you see him because although the Rangers didn't get the best version of Max Scherzer last year when he was activated off the IL during the postseason, I'm sure that it helped them. And I think Grayson could have a similar impact for the Orioles this year.
Might just be because he's a lanky left-hander, but here's another Rangers comp. I mean, Cade Povich could be your Cody Bradford. Cody Bradford was 12 starts, in different points of the year for the Rangers in the regular season last year, and he was pretty good. He had a sub-4 ERA. His stuff looked good. They were like, he might not be ready, but we need pitching. And he was never part of the rotation, but he pitched twice in the World Series. He made 5 appearances in the playoffs, and he gave up 1 run in 7 2/3 innings. They kind of deployed him at perfect times. Remember, I can't remember if it was game 1 or 2, but he was like the perfect bridge guy for the Rangers against the Orioles in that DS last year. And he carved up Baltimore. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2, but he went 3 2/3 scoreless innings out of the bullpen in his first ever playoff outing just because he gave the O's a completely different look in that game. Maybe Povich could do something like that. Little sneak peek. I did my first playoff roster projection for tomorrow's episode, and I did leave Povich off, but that was for the wild card roster because I just think there's only so much you can do in 3 games. But I do think if it got to a DS, he might sneak on there as one of those final arms.
Trevor Rogers to the rescue.
Before we move on, I want to bring up the focus on the injuries again for a moment. We have Danny Coulombe, Jacob Webb, Ramon Arias, and Jordan Westberg back. Maybe we get Ryan Mountcastle back before the season ends. We just talked about Grayson. Of the players that are fresh off the IL, which one do you think could have the biggest impact on the team in the postseason?
It's got to be Westberg, right? I mean, the defense and offense, if he's back on all cylinders at second and third base, I mean, Jackson Holliday, I don't know if he makes the postseason roster with Arias and Westberg back. As great as Coulombe, that nice dominant lefty, could be out of the bullpen in situations, and Webb, the fireman that can come in like every 2 out of 3 days, and even Arias, if he's hitting the way he was right before he got hurt, that's pretty huge too. But give me Westberg. I mean, he's a guy that you want in the middle of this lineup for the next 5-6 years. So.
Yeah, I would probably agree and say Westberg. I just feel like his demeanor, we know he's so cool, calm, and collected out there, no matter the situation. And I feel like defensively, he could bring just a nice vibe and help shore up everything defensively. Maybe help the pitchers feel more relaxed out there, knowing Westberg's got their back. And just his presence in that lineup, I think, is going to work wonders as we go down this stretch. I've been like iffy on Kerstad, and you guys know, like, when we look ahead and talk about Santander and his future and everything, I'm not completely sold on Heston Kerstad, but I mean, he had 3 hits the other day against Detroit. And if that concussion symptoms, if he is fully over all of that and he's feeling like himself again, I just feel like it. And if he makes the postseason roster, of course, as well, if he's on there, I feel like Kerstad could be that guy, is that linchpin guy for this lineup. Like that power from the left side, he gets hot for one series, just one weekend. He could completely change his series with his bat. He's been, whenever he's getting this opportunity, like he hasn't had that consistent stretch at the major league level yet with the injuries and getting sent up and down, etc. But I just feel like he's right there. He is on the verge. I always hate saying that when we're talking about this, but he is like right there. It's just brimming. This breakout it is right there for him. And if it's in a playoff series, like that's completely changing the game.
My goal for this episode is compare every Orioles player to a 2023 Ranger. Is this your Evan Carter? Heston Kerstad joins the roster, and all of a sudden, just young lefty starts to hit in the middle of the order. I think the answer to the question is Westberg. I mean, that's a middle of the order bat that you're getting back. I mean, he comes back, he hits second, and delivers a big game-tying RBI double in what his third at bat of the back on Sunday. That is what you need. He made some great plays at second. I don't know if anyone else is worried about the one throw that Westberg made to first base where it looked like his hand was maybe not still 100%. And it was like an easy throw and O'Hearn had to toe tap the bag, but that could have been just a one-time thing in Sunday's game. Either way, it's Westberg. But I will say, I don't know if Danny Coulombe is fully healthy. He's not a velocity guy, but he's throwing 88, 89, and we're usually Coulombe 90 to 91, but the breaking stuff still looks good. Brandon Hyde used him as the get me out of a jam guy every day reliever in the playoffs last year. And again, we didn't get to see it for a long sample size, but Coulombe, I believe in both games, was the first guy out of the pen. I think he finished Bradish's 5th in game 1. And then he finished Grayson's, what was that, second inning or third inning in game 2. And then that was kind of it. He got like 1 or 2 outs and he was done. He was just kind of your fireman, get this inning over with. That could be nice when you now have Corbin Burns and Zach Eflin, and theoretically your starters coming out in the 6th inning or the 7th inning, and Coulombe's the one to come in and get a couple of big-time lefties out and give you a clean inning to Cano or Dominguez or Soto or Webb or whomever it is. I just think he could play a factor, but just with Westberg up there 4 times a game, playing third or second base, giving you good at-bats, that changes this lineup.
Good question here from just a bit outside on YouTube. Do we think the runners in scoring position issues that the Orioles have had lately will be a factor in the playoffs, or do you think they can flip the switch, or they just work their way out of it by hitting a lot of home runs?
If they hit homers, it won't matter. If they don't hit homers, it will matter. I mean, that's the most simple way you can put it, but if they hit homers, it's really not going to matter if they're 1 for 9 or 3 for 9 with runners in scoring position. If they continue to not consistently hit the ball out of the ballpark, then yeah, it's going to rear its ugly head. Now, you just get less chances in the postseason because you end up with less base runners because the pitchers are better. But I think the simple answer to the question is if they start hitting home runs, it's really not going to matter.
My head says runners in scoring position, clutch. You know, it's all a game of luck and batted ball, batting, BABIP, whatever have you. But my heart is like, yeah, let's just not even worry about that and just hit it out of the park.
Yeah. I go back to what you said earlier, Connor, and like I said, that's a powder keg discussion there. It's the numbers don't lie. Like, I mean, I know Saris talks about this all the time too on Rates and Barrels. They've had a number of good discussions on that podcast about this, and teams like the Orioles and I think Twins and I think Red Sox are doing it as well. These are teams that this is what they're training their minor leaguers for. It's what they are preaching to the major league teams as well. Pull side power, hit the ball hard, hit the ball far. You win games. You're going to run into cold stretches, but you're going to win games. So, yeah, I'm not concerned about the runner in scoring position thing.
This is probably the simplest question of the night, but perhaps the most important. For most of this year, I think a lot of Orioles fans had the mindset of World Series or bust. You went out, you got Corbin Burns. For the first 3 months of the year, the Orioles were arguably the best team in baseball. They've dropped off since then. This is still a young roster. And with that in mind, what does postseason success look like for this team this year? Is it still World Series or bust? Is it just win a series? Is it get to the ALCS? What could we look at the end of October and say that was successful?
For me, I'll jump in first and just say I'm not on the World Series or bust wagon. Of course, you want to see a World Series. Of course, it's going to be frustrating and upsetting if they get into the playoffs and don't win the whole thing. But as long as you win one series, remain competitive in the ALCS, I'd like to see this team at least get to the ALCS and be competitive in that series. And give me a week or so, I'll look back and I'll be like, okay, this was a success, especially if some of the younger guys are the ones who are contributing. Like if it's a Kershaw, if it's Cowser, if it's, why did I want to say Grayson? Because we were just talking about him. But if these younger guys are the ones producing, then I'm going to feel good heading into next year. Like you've seen the number of injuries that have taken place. It's, I can't say World Series or bust at this point, but yeah, I think win a series, look better, have these young guys contribute. I'll feel pretty good about how the season ends.
I will be very happy if they make the ALCS or better. But honestly, win a game, win a series, just get that monkey off of our back since we haven't won a game since 2014. And I don't know. I think if you can come out and at least win the wild card series, it can go a long way long term with all these young guys. Like, look, we struggled to end the year. We still came into the playoffs and won a series. I think that would go a long way. But yeah, if I really want to say a success, ALCS or better for sure.
I probably value the regular season more than others. I think just because it's a slog, I think some of it has to do with hosting a daily podcast and being in it every single night and having to find the fun in that. Like the best Orioles season I know is 2012, and that team, I guess, technically won a playoff series because they won the wild card game, but got bounced in the ALDS because that regular season had so many memorable moments. The annoying part about this regular season is there wasn't as many memorable moments. We've certainly had our swings, but many more because many more wins in 2023. It's kind of a three-step process to make me at least content with this season. One is win a game. We haven't seen the Orioles win a postseason game since the 2014 ALDS. It has been 10 years. I would like to see that. Two is win a series. That's easier because you're in the wild card round, so you just got to win 2 baseball games. That would be nice to see them celebrate, hopefully on their own field in front of the O's fans, celebrating a playoff series win. We haven't seen that since the 90s because in 14, they beat the Tigers in Detroit. And in 12, they won the wild card game in Texas. So it's been a long time since we got to see the Orioles celebrate a postseason series win at Camden Yards. That would be really nice. And then number 3 is just give us a playoff memorable moment. I mean, even the 2014 Orioles, they only won 1 series, but of course we have the Delman double. We have the 8-run 8th inning in game 1 of that series. Even 2012, just it was a moment to just win that wild card game. You have, Jim Johnson striking out A-Rod. You have Hardy's double in the 13th in game 4. Like you have moments that you remember from those playoff games, even though they didn't make deep. Pole. Yeah, McLeod hitting the foul pole. You have these memories, even though they didn't make deep runs. And despite the amazing regular season last year, there's no postseason memory. I mean, I kind of remember how I felt on Aaron Hicks's 2-run single in the first in game 2, and that was the last good thing that happened to the 2023 Orioles. But mostly what I remember is just sitting there miserable as Dean Kramer gave up a run after run in game 3. Like there was no real moment. And even if you get bounced in the ALDS, give me something cool in the wild card round. Give me something awesome at Yankee Stadium where they win a game in the ALDS. Like give me something to hold on to in the postseason and know that they can win a playoff game. That would be nice to know because we still don't know that if they can do that. And then give me some sort of memory. And here's another thing. Delman Young, while that was an awesome moment, is not person-wise someone who I want to base the entire Orioles best moment in a long, long time around. I would really, really like for there to be a better postseason moment so we can stop turning Delman Young into a hero, because if you'd like to look it up, you can. He's not a real good person off the field. So I would like for someone else to be in that spotlight and not Delman Young. And now that I say that, it might be Keegan Aiken. But, anybody to get somebody new. Another highlight that Orioles fans can post and get 100 retweets for free. That's what I would like to see.
Oh, Colton Cowser, step up. We need a hero right now.
That would be... Oh.
Come on, Tinkerbell. He really looked good in that outfit. I'm not going to lie.
I think for me, a series win would be the ultimate at this point, because I do think it would be not just a boost for this team, but I have to think it's a little bit of a boost for Brandon Hyde. And we don't really focus on that aspect much. But I have to think if Brandon Hyde is the guy, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, if Brandon Hyde is the guy and you're planning on him being here long term, I'm sure for him, there's something to be said for I got through that series. I went up against this, and this, and I got through the series, because there were a lot of points last year where the experience gap between him and Bruce Bochy was on full display in the postseason. So I think for Hyde to get a series win would be like, all right, I've got that in my back pocket now. I've got manager of the year. I've led a team that won the division. I've won a postseason series. On to the next thing. And I think that would be helpful to him. And with that, now I think we'll wrap up here, which is that everyone, even though this regular season is not even over yet, and we don't know what the playoffs are going to bring, everyone is asking what's next. And there's a lot of hitting coach, or a lot of attention, I think, unfairly being paid on the hitting staff at the major league level, and questions about their job security that I don't think tell the whole story of the work that they've done here. But does anything change if the Orioles fall flat in the playoffs? And if so, what is it? Because it doesn't seem like Mike Elias is going anywhere. Doesn't seem like Brandon Hyde is going anywhere. So what is going to change? If it's not personnel, is it something philosophical? Is it just we have deep-pocketed ownership now, so we're going to spend our way out of this issue? What do you think it's going to be?
I mean, go ahead, Nick.
I was just saying money. Like, I go back and read. Andy has done great work. John Mioli's done great work. Both those guys, phenomenal articles at the Banner talking about the hitting coaches and how these guys. I'm so sick and tired of the debacle that is the conversation around these hitting coaches. It's, as I think John wrote about, like, this is ingrained. You remove Ryan Fuller or Matt Barkschulte, you're going to bring in someone else like a Brink Ambler or someone like that from within the organization who's from the same school of thought. Like, this is one organization from the DSL up to the major leagues and everywhere in between, as we talk about all the time. But yeah, I think the big thing is, like, this offseason, not to look ahead too much, but we get to see what this organization can do, what Mike Elias can do, wants to do. That's what I'm anxious to see, with money, with actual financial backing. Like, let's see that. Yeah, I'm pretty content with this coaching staff that's in place here.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to say that it's nice to know that we have an organization that if they think something's wrong, they'll make adjustments. Like, we don't need to fire everyone and bring in a brand new, Leo Mazzone pitching coach situation. They'll make the adjustments, and I'm pretty confident in that at this point. So maybe you see a Buck Britton come in as a bench coach so that if things go south next year, then you have someone ready, willing to step in if Brandon Hyde's on the hot seat. I think everyone's back for the most part from this year to next, but then maybe next year it gets a little interesting if there's a slow start or what have you. But yeah, spend that money.
Yeah, the combination of Nick and Bob's answers are kind of the perfect thing. Number one is we don't know what Rubenstein's going to open it up to. And also, even if he opens it up, you still don't know what Mike Elias is going to be willing to do, because it's still going to be, I think, at least this offseason, there's going to be a more open checkbook. But I think Rubenstein is still going to defer to Elias. I don't see him, at least now, being an owner who's overstepping his GM. And so Elias is still going to make those final calls with just the ability to maybe give out a 3-year deal instead of a 2-year deal to a starting pitcher, things like that. But spending the money is going to make this team potentially look different. And maybe you could spend for Max Fried instead of having to trade for Corbin Burns. Like, maybe that's something that you can actually do. in the offseason. And the second thing is, like Nick made the perfect point. If you feel like if the Orioles fired Matt Borg-Schulte on October 25th, it would not be because Matt Borg-Schulte was teaching the wrong things. It would be because the Orioles thought that Borg-Schulte's way of communicating with his players and also with his other coaches and with management was not getting the right message across. And they would replace him, as you said, with Brink Ambler, or Cody Ashe would get promoted or something like that. Like they would just promote from within, or they might hire from outside like they did with Drew French or with Borg-Schulte, but it would be someone who they knew was going to fall directly into line with the things that they're teaching. Like the approach is not changing. It has gotten the Orioles to this point over the last 3 years, and it's going to continue to do that over large sample sizes. It is throughout the entire minor league system as well as they develop all of these players. We just saw it happen with the pitching coach. Chris Holt did not get fired, or not fired. He, well, got demoted / promoted. You can argue what exactly happened with Chris Holt, but he did not get moved into another role because the Orioles didn't like what he was teaching. There was clearly something with the way he was getting his message across to the big league pitchers that wasn't working for the O's. The message was going to stay the same with whoever they hired. It was just going to come from a different person and put in a different way. And it seems like these guys really take to Drew French. Yeah, he came from outside the org, but he was with the Astros with Elias and Sig for a long time. He came in preaching a lot of the same things. And Chris Holt, guess what, is still in the organization. He's just in a different role. That is what would happen. And to be quite honest, this is not going to happen. But if they really did get to the point where they were firing Brandon Hyde, and it seems like Mike Elias values the continuity with Hyde, especially because he's still the manager now, he didn't replace him when things got good, they would replace Brandon Hyde not with Terry Francona, not with Ron Washington, not with Joe Madden, not with Buck Showalter. They would replace him with someone who they felt could do the same things Brandon Hyde was doing, maybe just messaging a little better to his own team. So that's where it's not clicking, I think, for a lot of people, is that Elias isn't losing his job. And I don't think anyone's really calling for Elias's head. Rightfully so. He's rebuilt this organization. But as long as he's in charge, he's going to put people in place who are going to give off basically the same message, no matter who they are. So you can want Brandon Hyde fired to just see somebody's head roll. And that's the other thing, like people want, oh, let's pull up Buck Britton. He's just going to be a younger, less experienced version of Brandon Hyde. Like, I'm not sure what you think, but if you wanted to make a change, you would bring in someone like Terry Francona, who has their own values and wants to run their own organization their own way. The O's aren't going to do that. They're going to do someone who's going to be a middle manager between Mike Elias and the players. And that's something Brandon Hyde has done really, really well for the past 5 years. So that's not going to get through to most people, but most things you say that are factual don't get through to a lot of people who are really upset about these things. It's just the reality of the situation. Whether or not they would make a change would all be based on things we just can't know about. That is how these guys are communicating messages to the players and back up to the front office.
Clip it. Save it. You can tell we've all been on Twitter way too much, and we're glad we are all taking a much needed break.
And this is from a guy who's been off Twitter for like 4 months, and it's still.
But you can imagine. YouTube comments. You can imagine.
That can fully cleanse me. Yeah,
I get it. Love it.
Well said by all three of you. The only thing I think that I would add is that I do think that there needs to be a lot more conversation this offseason about the depth of this organization, because unless Kobe Mayo begins next season back in AAA, this is going to be the first year in a few years. 2025 will be the first year in a few years where you don't have someone at AAA where immediately you're trying to figure out how you're going to make room for them. And there's been a lot of points this year where the Orioles probably could have used Kyle Gibson. Adam Frazier has not had a good year in Kansas City. I don't think he would have changed anything with this team, but a better version of the 2023 Adam Frazier would have done the Orioles a lot of good this year. So I do think that there has to be more conversation about the depth of the Major League roster. And I know that's a conversation that a lot of Orioles fans, or at least a very vocal portion of the fan base, doesn't want to talk about. If it's not a splashy move, don't waste my time kind of thing. But I think you have to look at that a lot more this offseason and figure out who can you plug in when your younger players are struggling or when someone is hurt, that is going to stabilize this team. Not necessarily make it significantly better or even a little bit better, but to stabilize it. I think that they have to make more of those kinds of moves this offseason.
It's a good point, because I think you're seeing why the Orioles have slow played even the best prospects at AAA. Like, you can't go in relying on 2-3 rookies at the same time, because as talented and as good as I think Kobe Mayo and Jackson Holiday are going to be as soon as next year, in my opinion, it's just a huge jump. There's a big acclimation period, and you saw what happened when injuries hit and you have no one else to rely on other than these guys, who it's better for them and the organization to have a softer landing spot. And then you have to go with guys, 4A guys like Emmanuel Rivera, who, hats off. I mean, you've played really well since coming to the Orioles, but it's not what you want to bank on as you're going down the stretch in a playoff chase.
Yeah, the guys they brought in, the Slaters, the even Sotos, the Riveras, I mean, they helped this team when they needed it most. I think the starting pitching thing is a little tough to grade depth-wise right now, because at one point you had lost an entire starting rotation on the injured list, and that is really, really tough to replace, and guys stepped up. I mean, Albert Suarez, I mean, if you could find 3 more Albert Suarez's at different positions, you'd be set. I think they were on the right track. They need to find a healthy medium between it not being Rougned Odor and Adam Frazier, but it also not being just we're relying on the rookies to be that position player depth. And maybe just adding an Austin Slater type player in the offseason to be there in the outfield. And now that'll depend a lot on whether Santander is back in an Oro uniform, or maybe an infielder, a better version of Emmanuel Rivera, who's just there, can give you 400 at-bats, can play multiple positions, has been in the big leagues for 7-8 years, and can just be a guy that you can count on and turn to if you need him to become an everyday player. But he's a 4 times a week player. And I know people hated Rougned Odor and hated Adam Frazier, and they probably weren't as productive as the Orioles wanted them to be. But it was nice to have adults in the room on those teams when there were so many young guys. And I think some of the adults in the room were supposed to be some of the arms that got hurt. And I really think an Aaron Hicks helped this team a lot. And I really think Kyle Gibson, I mean, it was a fantastic article, I believe in The Athletic this week, about what Kyle Gibson has done for the Cardinals. And there was just so many young pitchers talking about how much he's helped them. And the catchers were like, he's completely revamped how we prepare for opposing hitters. And I really think Kyle Gibson made a huge impact on this team last year. And Corbin Burns, there cannot be a bigger upgrade for going from Kyle Gibson to Corbin Burns. And I think Corbin Burns has been great for this young staff, but he's in a different part of his career. He's in I'm trying to get my bag part of his career, rather than I'm at the tail end trying to pass on the knowledge and still give you 180 solid innings part of his career. So I think one of those guys is a pitcher and a hitter. I think the O's will be looking to bring those guys in anyway, but it would be really, really nice for this team to just have that guy to fall back on. And I think there's been some talk that's actually been relevant of the O's haven't really struggled like this yet with all these young guys. And there's maybe not enough adults in the room to just stabilize that right now. And some of that could be because of the injuries and guys being gone. But even your more veteran hitters are the Austin Slaters, who was on that one fluky good team with the Giants, or Eloy Jimenez, who was on one good White Sox team. And those guys came over at the deadline. Your Ryan O'Hearns, who was on some terrible Royals teams and, is just figuring it out for himself. And your other veterans have just always been Orioles. So they've only gone through the terrible years and then the winning last year. So your only adult is kind of James McCann. And even James McCann, when he was on a good Mets team, they were trying to run him out of New York. So nobody's really had that full experience to be like, guys, it's going to be okay. And I don't know. I think I value Clubhouse more than your typical guy who reads Fangraphs as much as I do. And I think that some of that could come in with a veteran type Austin Slater, but a little more experienced and better type player for the outfield, a little bit better Adam Frazier for the infield, to just stabilize things, because it's good to know that you're not going to win 100 games every year. I think this year has told us that. And especially Austin Slater would know best. The 2021 Giants can tell you that things can snap in an instant after you win 100 games. So I think somebody like that, as Zach talked about, for that depth and that leadership would be kind of nice.
Well said. And with that, that does it for this portion of the show. Bob, Nick, and I will be on later this week to break down the Norfolk Tides 2024 season. I will add as programming note here, October 14th, that's a Monday at 6 p.m. We will be hosting our live show at Checker Spot Brewing Company. We hope at that point the Orioles are in the playoffs. We look forward to that. Checker Spot, a great place, 1421 Ridgely Street in Baltimore. And congratulations to them for winning the South Baltimore Brewery District hot dog race for the second year in a row. Way to bring the title back. And Connor, as I understand it, we can pencil you in as a guest for this
Yes,
show.
pencil me. Hopefully pen soon, but you can pencil me in.
Absolutely. And we will announce more guests leading up to that date. And Connor, before we go, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really enjoyed this discussion. You mentioned your projected postseason roster episode that will probably be out by the time most people listen to this episode. But what else is coming up at Locked On Orioles as the regular season winds down?
Yeah, so we'll be daily for the rest of the week, and then hopefully they can win a wild card series and play some weekend playoff games. If they do that, there'll be weekend episodes coming out right after, hopefully some Saturday or Sunday ALDS games in a couple of weekends here, but daily episodes getting you ready for the postseason. Hopefully there'll be a clinching episode coming up in the next couple of days. For Tuesday's episode, not only am I projecting the postseason roster for the first time, but some absolute just sicko, this guy needs to touch grass behavior as I break down all of the clinching scenarios and why the magic number is 2 and not 1 for the Minnesota Twins and what the three-way tiebreaker would look like and all that good stuff. I completely nerd out. Some people will tune me out after 4 minutes and some people will really be in the weeds for that one. But yeah, it's going to be a weird week because once they clinch, the games will not matter too much. So it'll kind of just be gearing up for the playoffs once they finally get that magic number down to 0. But you can check out Locked On Orioles wherever you get podcasts, wherever you get this lovely podcast, on YouTube as well. All of those fantastic places. Just don't look in the YouTube comments unless you're going to add something positive or helpful.
Bob, Nick, and I will be back later this week. In the meantime, you can catch us on many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member of our community. We will have exclusive coverage well into the off season over there. And if you're a paying member, you get shouted out like our 2 new members did at the beginning of this episode. For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.
Thanks, Connor.
Thank you guys.
That was awesome.
Good luck recap. See, it's nice to have more than a quick 30-minute show. Then I can really go on a diatribe like that, which is probably going to happen on my show in the off season, but I don't have the energy for it during the season until now. All right. Thank you guys.
Ton to talk about coming up.
Yeah. Good luck with the Tides recap. Yeah, I think honestly, I will be in for the live show. It'll just be probably me texting you guys the day of being like, I'm either going to make it from work or I'm going to be a little late. But yeah, I should be in for that one on the 14th.
Great.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Good.
Look forward to it.
All right.
All right.
I will see you guys then. Hopefully we are watching ALCS game 1.
Please.
See you guys.
See ya.
See ya. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the Norfolk Tides. Their 2024 season did not go quite as well as their historically dominant 2023 campaign, but there was still a lot to talk about this Norfolk team, which boasted the Orioles position, player, and pitcher of the year in the minor leagues, and we will get to all of that in just a moment. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or on one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. And we've come to the final minor league recap of the 2024 season. Minor league season is officially in the books. And the Norfolk Tides finished off with a record of 69-81, well short of the championship that they had last year. But it was still an interesting year. And this team actually got off to a very good start, going 7-2 over their first 9 games. But then after an April sweep at the hands of the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders, they couldn't seem to get things quite on track, despite the fact that their offense finished in the top 5 in home runs, and they finished fourth, or excuse me, with the third highest strikeouts on the pitching side. There were some issues. Their 5.10 ERA was the fourth worst in the International League, and their offense led the circuit in strikeouts. So, Nick, I'll start with you here. There were nights that you could see pretty good baseball watching the Tides, and certainly your fair share of top prospects. So we'll break down tonight. But overall, it just seemed like maybe some instability, not having the depth that last year's team had, contributed to them struggling more this year.
Yeah, I think you saw a long stretch there where it was very like 2018, 2017 Norfolk Tides roster, where it's like Johnny Giovitella is cleanup hitter and the star of the show. Who is that? Doesn't matter. He's not in baseball anymore. It was a lot of nights like that. But still, I think outside of the top prospects, who a lot of those guys reached the major leagues. Kerstad's back up in the majors here and there. Holiday up in the majors. Mayo got up to the majors. Like the top prospects did their thing, and that's all I care about. Like that, I mentioned the other a previous recap. Like I know they're great things, people, jobs, money. I don't care about minor league team records and playoff appearances and all that. I want to see the top prospects continue to grow and develop, and I want to see some of these guys, these less heralded prospects. I want to see who breaks out. Are you taking steps forward in your development? That's all I care about, and we saw a lot of that. I think we even had some questions answered about guys like, if you still had questions about guys like Hudson Haskin and such, I think those questions were answered this year, unfortunately, not in a positive way. But yeah, I mean, a lot of guys like Daniel Johnson had a great season in Norfolk. That's solid AAA depth down there. I think the quad A guys, they did their job as well and just kind of did their thing, hang out in case of emergency if needed in the major leagues. So, but yeah, just sad I didn't get to go down to Harbor Park this year for when they were rocking with all these prospect heavy lineups. I only got down to Harbor Park one time this year, and it was for a Savannah Bananas game, which is not as entertaining actually as watching Kobe Mayo hit nukes, but still, good time.
Yeah, there were stretches where it was Norfolk is the game I'm tuning into. Early in the season, it was Kerstad, Holiday, Mayo, and even Norby and Stowers were still hanging out there. And then there were stretches where it was Gene Segura, J.D. Davis, Daniel Johnson, Nick Maton, Garrett something from they used to play for the Marlins. Yeah, it was just like is this a Dominican Winter League team right now? I don't know. But overall, you end the year with Fabian, Beavers, and Basayo on the roster. Like nice little sneak peek at what it's going to look like at the beginning of next year. So, yeah, I mean, AAA, if nothing else, they have the best production crew. They have the best cameras. So it is nice to be able to see the upper echelon of the farm system in that environment with all the StatCast data and the quality production. So it's always going to be at least a little fun in AAA.
Yeah, when Norfolk's lineup was at its strongest, which was really in the beginning of the year when they had Heston Kjerstad, they had Kobe Mayo, they had Jackson Holiday for stretches early in the season. They were a lot of fun. They had that series at Charlotte where they put up 20 runs in a game. And you could tune in and see some really good baseball. I think that just because of some of the trades, Connor Norby being a guy that would have spent some time there over the last couple months of the season, that was moved, Kyle Stowers as well. And some of the injuries at the major league level kind of affected them. But there were stretches where the Tides were pretty fun to watch. And a big part of that was Mayo, who the Orioles named their minor league position player of the year last week. What Mayo did at AAA this year in 89 games was nothing short of impressive, belting 22 home runs, while posting a 135 WRC plus. And to go along with that, hits 287 and has a walk rate of over 10% and a strikeout rate just under 25%, which I think you can live with when you have that kind of power. If nothing else, Mayo has now solidified himself as a consensus top 10, top 15, top 20 prospect in the game. His major league time over a small sample size maybe has not gone as well as we would have hoped, but he showed us this year why he could be a really special player and did so at 22 years old in AAA.
Yeah, that's the thing for me. It's the age, production, and level you're at. Kobe Mayo was fantastic in those regards. Yeah, the major league time, only 46 plate appearances, and they weren't good. It was a -7 WRC plus. He had a couple hits, couple moments, but still like 47, 48% strikeout rate. Not great, but like we talked about before, it's very easy to just kind of go, oh, it's the Orioles, Colton Cowser, Grayson Rodriguez, blah, blah, blah. Insert Kobe Mayo now. He takes his lumps at the major league level. He has the offseason. He's going to come back next year and be in the running for Rookie of the Year 2025. It's easy to say that, but I genuinely do believe that with him, just because I go back to when we broke down Mayo and Baseball America broke down Mayo with one of the deeper analytical dives I've ever seen on Mayo. And we talked about that article, and there's just so many glowing things about Mayo's performance down in AAA, his batted ball data, his swing profile, all of that portend to major league success. It's just, I feel like we always talk about how that jump from AAA to the majors is bigger than it's ever been. I think part of that is teams are more prepared than ever for these guys when they come up. They've got a full book on Kobe Mayo. They know exactly, like, if this guy, I hate to say this guy, Elliot, I think is his name, but if anybody can write an article about breaking down some guy analytically like that, a prospect like that who's in AAA, what do you think major league teams have on these guys nowadays? They're more than ready. And, now it's Kobe Mayo's turn. Go into this offseason and you rewrite his own book. How is he going to attack major league pitchers? Because major league pitchers don't miss. They rarely miss. So, yeah, I have all the confidence in the world in Mayo coming back next year stronger than ever. And where he plays defensively, don't care right now. Sold on the bat, 100%.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, we saw Colton Cowser looked absolutely dreadful in his time in the majors last year. What did he do? Oh, he's probably a bare minimum top 2 finisher in Rookie of the Year this year with 22 home runs and playing amazing defense when even that didn't look as good at the brief taste he got last year. So, yeah, Mayo's going to take everything that he got fed at the major league level this year and shore up any holes. And I think just it's a little bit of confidence too, right? I mean, you start slow, you start striking out. First pitch, ump calls a strike, could have gone either way, but it goes against you. Then it's a low and away slider that you swing and miss. And now you're 0-2 and you're guessing, and it just snowballs. So, yeah, start fresh, have a good spring next year, take it from there, and could very easily be 2025's Rookie of the Year contender for the Orioles, Mr. Kobe Mayo. Incredible season altogether. I wonder what it would have looked like if he didn't fall at the making that catch into the dugout. Would have made a major league debut sooner. Maybe could have adjusted quicker, but either way, the future is super bright, and I think he'll be an Oriole till at least 2030. So let's get used to writing his name in the lineup.
I kind of view Mayo's major league time the same way that I viewed Colton Cowser's stint last year, which was that it was an inevitability that he was going to get to the major leagues. And certainly our expectations for what he could do were higher than what he ultimately delivered. But I also think that there is a part of it that the Orioles had their hands forced a little bit in ways they may not have wanted, coming off of Jordan Westburg's injury. And you look at what Mayo had to begin his major league career with. 3 games against a very tough Cleveland team. You have 2 against Toronto, which the Blue Jays are not the Blue Jays of recent vintage this year, but they can still play the Orioles pretty tough. And then a game against Tampa Bay, a game against Washington where he gets that hit and then he's sent down. He got that little bit of a cameo in September, but again was used kind of sparingly. And a lot of that is just because you don't want to put undue pressure on a 22-year-old rookie for a team that is fighting for a playoff spot and just can't seem to get anything going for itself, which is what the Orioles have been for most of September. So I do think that his debut probably came under less than ideal circumstances. And much like Colton Cowser did this year, Mayo is going to have to go into spring training and earn that roster spot next year. He doesn't have anything left to prove at AAA statistically, but there's a real chance that he goes back to Norfolk next year. The Orioles don't think that they can get him regular at bats. However, would I rule out him doing what Cowser did? Absolutely not. I think he's fully capable of that. So, we're a long ways off, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if Mayo has a big spring, I think he's got a shot at the opening day roster.
Yeah, and also Kobe was not alone as someone who was struggling in the last few months of this season. Jackson Holliday, I think in September, has like an OPS of 300 and something. So yeah, it's unfortunately the offense has been struggling in general. And yeah, like you said, that's a lot of pressure to be like, oh, here comes this 22-year-old. He's going to save the day. No, you don't want to put that pressure on him. So yeah, agree with a lot with what you guys are saying.
I'm glad you brought up Holiday because that's the next player that I was going to discuss. His time at Norfolk this year overall was productive. 346 plate appearances across 73 games, hit 271 with a 908 OPS. Once again, had excellent walk to strikeout numbers, walking nearly as many times as he struck out with the Tides, and showing more power than he has at any single level in his professional career by belting 10 home runs. Yet his major league time, for all of the expectations that were placed on him early on, and then coming back up in July, hitting the grand slam against Toronto, it felt like, all right, this is it. This is where he's going to ascend. And while I think Holiday overall has looked more comfortable at the plate the second go around, as Bob just said, the numbers have not been good over the months of September, and August was not a whole lot better for Holiday. So, yet, if you want to look for encouragement, you could look at what he did at AAA and figure out, okay, he overcame some adversity. He had an IL stint. He came off of that and looked really good as a glimmer for what could be the future with him. So I know we'll probably talk about this a lot more when the major league season wraps up, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on Holiday's 2024.
On the plus side, I think his defense at second base has really improved throughout the year, and he looks pretty good out there to my eye. He's made some really, really nice plays defensively. At the plate, it just seems like he made that adjustment, and then teams just adjusted right back, and he hasn't been able to respond quickly enough. But he's also 20 years old, so it's a lot is just like he's too good for AAA. He's not quite good enough for major leagues yet. I think one off season of turning 21, being able to drink, and just having that experience, I think next year's going to be a whole different story. But yeah, he wasn't walking obviously like he did in the minor leagues and the major leagues, and he wasn't showing off the hit tool that he definitely has. Everyone's like, "Oh, I thought he had a 70 hit tool." He does. Relax. He's 20 years old. He'll be fine. But yeah, I think just kind of take your medicine learning experience for Jackson.
When the Orioles clinch, not if, and they may have already clinched by the time this episode comes out on the main podcast feed, if you're not watching on YouTube, do we think the Orioles also pull out the baby stroller with the non-alcoholic beer like they did for Jackson Churio in Milwaukee? That was hilarious. But yeah, with Holidays, yeah, you talk about the improved defense over there at second base. According to Fangraphs, he's been worth negative 0.3 FWAR this season, but the issue hasn't been his defense. That rates pretty favorably. So yeah, it's again, same thing as Kobe. You look at what he did, his batted ball profile, his swing data. You look at all that with Jackson Holliday down in AAA. It was unbelievable for a 20-year-old at the AAA level who had nearly more walks than strikeouts. It was a 21.7% walk rate to a 22.3% strikeout rate. And that's across 346 plate appearances. That is a substantial sample size there. The hit tool is there. The eye is there. Like Bob said, major leaguers, like we talked about with Mayo as well, major league pitchers rarely miss, and they know exactly how to attack him, and they're able to carry out that attack plan, unlike AAA pitchers who really struggle to do that. So it's about, again, Holiday. And just the other night, I forget which game it was specifically, but then you have like that 2-run up the middle single, like help. That's a clutch hit. I love that play. He's not worried about hitting the home run. He just did his job, drove the ball right up the middle, went with the pitch, drove in 2 runs. Beautiful. You'd like to see that more consistently, but I think this was a really good experience for him. And going back to what Connor was talking about on the last episode there, and having the adults in the room, right? Guys who have been there before. I also wonder, like, as far as the bats go, there's also with Mayo and Holiday, like the veterans were struggling as well. So it's like, who was really there to be like, hey, like you can get through this? I don't really know if anyone was able to do that with them. Because they're trying to figure out their own stuff at the same time. So I still think it's a fantastic learning experience, and nothing that I saw from Holiday or Mayo this year, even if Holiday doesn't make the playoff roster, I'm not expecting him to be on the playoff roster. Great learning experience for both these guys, and feel uber confident heading into 2025.
Before we move on and start talking about the pitching staff, a couple of quick notes. Judd Fabian, Samuel Basayo both had stints in Norfolk to end the season. Neither of them really gave you a full sense, good or bad, I think, of how they were performing at AAA, but I think you still saw enough to know what they need to work on to be more successful there next year. Dylan Beavers gets a 1-week cameo at the very end of the season. And then you had some guys play out the end of their time in the Orioles organization, largely with Norfolk and Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers. The Tides also had Heston Kjerstad for 56 games, and he put up really good numbers there. So there's some other smaller things to unpack with the Tides lineup. What stood out, good, bad, or maybe even indifferent when you look at Norfolk?
Good. I was going to say Basayo. I know the overall numbers don't look great. I think we talked about this last week with the Buoy recap, but he had a number of multi-hit nights down there. I'm pretty stoked to see him as the primary catcher next year for Norfolk. And I think we know what the bat is. We know it's pretty special. I don't see it diminishing at all. So looking ahead to next year, I'm excited to pay attention to the defense more. Hopefully there's more written about the defense and get a better idea of what his role could be at the major league level. Fabian, Beavers, just keep doing what you're doing. Hopefully, like, there's no rush to bring those guys up next year and they can sit and marinate in AAA as long as possible. And same thing, I'm excited to see where their trajectories take them. Maybe one of them isn't in the organization because of a trade this offseason. Who knows? But yeah, the bats, I'm trying to find even if, like, there is anybody else to talk about with the bats. Taryn Baber came back. That was cool, I guess. Yeah, I guess the only other thing I had was like Hudson Haskin. If you want to still consider him a prospect or not. I just think the hamstring and hip injuries kind of zapped him. He did steal 22 bases this year, which I did not think he was capable of, and walked at a really decent rate. But he was still batting like 7 or 8 in Norfolk's lineup most nights, even on those lineups that had a bunch of nobodies. He's still batting at the bottom of the order. And I just don't think you can trust that body to hold up moving forward, unfortunately.
Yeah, Basayo, I mean, really rough start. In his first 7 games was 4 for 31 with 1 walk, 1 home run. But then over the last 54 plate appearances from September 5th on, batted 280 with a 793 OPS, walked much more often than that, struck out less, 105 WRC plus. So you can already see the adjustments being made. I think, again, another year, he'll be 20 years old going into 2025. Another year of just growing stronger, just more mature. I think he'll be a top 5 prospect in baseball. I think he'll be number 1 at some point, probably, just because he'll be around until most likely late into the season, if not into 2026, prospect eligible. So yeah, very, very excited for him next year. That'll be the prospect everyone will be watching and focusing on, and I think it's warranted. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way he ended the year.
Moving on to the pitching staff now, I think the guy we got to start with is obvious, and that's Brandon Young, who was named the Orioles Minor League Pitcher of the Year on Friday for the excellent 2024 campaign that he had, most of which was at Norfolk. In 89 innings of the Tides this year, Young posted a 3.44 ERA while striking out 96 batters and walking 33. And he mastered what has become a really tough jump between AA and AAA for pitchers. Not that it wasn't always tough, but in recent years, you've had the change in baseball at the AAA level. You've also had the introduction of the automated ball strike system and the talent system. And what we've seen in that in the last 2 years, the International League has started to tilt more towards hitters than it typically had in the past. Young, however, seemed really comfortable at the AAA level. And as I said in a Patreon exclusive episode on Friday, I think the only reason we didn't see him in the major leagues this year is that by the time it got to the point where the Orioles needed to promote him, the need for starting pitching was not as dire as we had thought it was going to be, because they could put together 5 healthy and mostly productive starters week to week. So they didn't need Young. But had they needed him, he certainly was making a strong case for major league time at AAA. And now he goes into what is going to be a pretty big offseason for him, because of all the players that are Rule 5 eligible that have not been added to the 40-man roster yet, Young is seemingly the only lock. And what's impressive is that he did all of this coming off of Tommy John surgery. Coming into this season, he had only thrown 53 and a third combined innings over the last 2 seasons. So, Bob, I'll start with you. Young has risen up our list. He's getting a lot more attention nationally. What did you see from him this year that stood out?
Just honestly, consistency, being able to come back from the injury, get off to a good start, which turns out was not as good as he was in AAA. In AA Bowie, he had a 4.09 ERA, only 22 innings, 36 to 4 strikeout to walk ratio, pretty ridiculous. And then goes up to AAA and throws about 90 more innings, 3.44 ERA, more strikeouts than innings pitched, just to be consistently out there every 5-6 days and throw over 100 innings this year after being out for so long. I mean, that to me was the most impressive, and he didn't lose anything throughout the year. So to be able to go into the off season and be like confident that he can have a full healthy season with his reconstructed arm, his elbow, it's got to be good. And the award and the accolades can't hurt either. I think he's definitely coming into spring training looking to win a job in the starting rotation. And who am I to doubt him at this point? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if we clinch early in the week, if maybe they throw him on the 40-man roster just at the very tail end and get his feet wet with a start against the Twins on Saturday or Sunday, just to say why not.
Yeah, that's the big. I didn't realize how many innings he had thrown this year. Actually, 111 total innings this season after just 40 innings last year, 13 the year before that. Like Zach said, 53 combined innings over the last 2 years. Like that's, and coming off Tommy John surgery, I think he set himself up tremendously well for next year. To be able to throw 111 innings after essentially missing 2 straight seasons and a second Tommy John surgery, it wasn't even his first, it was a second Tommy John surgery. I think that's pretty huge. And like Bob mentioned about not losing stuff as the season progressed, if I can get this to load real quick, his last couple starts here in September, he made 4 starts in the month of September, 5+ innings in each of them, 20 innings, 16 strikeouts, 7 walks, 3.54 ERA, pretty solid there. Like he ended on a super high note. There was the walk rate. I know there was issues. Somebody I know had reached out after his first couple starts in Norfolk and was like, that walk rate is tremendously high. Like what's going on there? Is that something to be concerned about or a blip? I mentioned it's because he was sick. They pulled him early that game. That was the blip on the radar that inflated those numbers. They came down to around like 8% in total in AAA. Pretty solid, all things considered as well. Yeah, it's Young. Like he's not the kind of guy who you're like, oh, we don't need starters. We don't need to go out and sign more starters because we got McDermott and Young in the wings. No, you go sign starters, please. Go trade for him, please. But like Young's going to be right there in the mix for a starting rotation spot in spring training. And if he doesn't get it from the jump, he'll be in the major leagues at some point next year. And I do agree. He might be the only guy added to the 40-man roster at this point as far as Rule 5 eligible guys go. That's a pretty darn good guy, though, to add to your roster moving forward.
And let's talk about McDermott now, who did make his major league debut this year, making 1 start against the Marlins back in July. At Norfolk, he put together another productive season, 3.89 ERA and 104 innings pitched, 147 strikeouts to 62 walks. And while he did have a late season injury, he did manage to come back and pitch last week, delivered 3 scoreless innings in his final outing of the year, a short start. And if you look at anything with McDermott, you could quibble about the walks, that maybe the command didn't improve to the extent that you would like for it to have in his second go round AAA. But this is something that's worth pointing out. He walked 15 batters over his first 12 innings this year. And then after that, it seemed like things kind of leveled off and settled down. He would still have starts in there where the walk totals were a little bit high, but overall, he overcame that rough patch that he had at the beginning of the year, which I think is understandable when you consider that his season ended somewhat early the year before, coming off a back injury. Command took a little bit of time to settle in, but once it did, he was really good for this Tides team. There's a lot that we could talk about with McDermott. We could talk about what he did this year. We could talk about what his role is in Baltimore going forward. Is he a starter? Is he a reliever? But I think one thing we can't deny at this point is that since McDermott has come over the Orioles organization, he's made a clear progression, now considered by most outlets to be a top 10 prospect in this system and arguably its top pitching prospect. Nick, what do you think the Orioles have in Chase McDermott?
I feel more confident in saying that Chase McDermott is going to have a pretty successful major league career and be an impact arm for this team. He's got the traits to be a successful starter. He's got the fastball velo, he's got the extension. You hear all the time, especially like I know Fangraphs has been high on this belief that he is. You look at all of his traits, he screams late bloomer, and then you add injuries on top of that. I still think this is a guy who, the age thing, we've talked about this a lot in the past, how he's an older prospect. I don't really mind that as much with McDermott because I still think there's a pretty wide gap between who he is now and what his ceiling can be. And the walks being the major issue, I feel like, again, I feel like there was a conversation recently about pitching, again, to reference Rates and Barrels. I listen to other things, not just Rates and Barrels, I promise. But they have great conversations most weeks. And they were talking about, pitching traits and drafting pitching traits and everything. I think it was that episode. Either way, they were talking about how like control is still something that you can teach. Even when you get to the major leagues, like you can still teach that. That's still something that can be improved upon. And I tried to look back real quick earlier. I think we're seeing that with DL Hall in Milwaukee already at the major league level as he's working as a starter. Having some intermittent success there as he's trying to remain fully healthy and get a consistent role with his innings. But like if McDermott can do that as well, that's going to be a pretty quality arm for you. But I still feel even more confident this year after watching what he did in Norfolk. I feel even more confident in saying if he doesn't crack the rotation, the Orioles would send him down to Norfolk to continue to work as a starter. But man, still think he could be that lights out late inning relief arm if you need him midway through next season.
Yeah, there's a wide range of what his ultimate outcome could be. Maybe poor man's Kyle Bradish in the middle of a rotation is the upside. The downside, quote unquote downside, is a high leverage reliever. I think bare minimum, he's a quality arm in a major league pitching staff. So he's a major league pitcher. He's got the stuff. He doesn't get hit hard. He strikes out a bunch of batters. The only thing that's to be determined is he going to be a starter or a reliever? But happy to have him under our wings here for the next 6-7 years. It's definitely going to come in handy, that's for sure.
I do want to bring up Cade Povich for a moment because Povich did have a lot of time in Norfolk this year. And although we'll talk about him more when the season ends, it's worth noting that after a really up and down stint with the Tides in 2023, he was pretty dominant out of the gate for them this year and ultimately put together 77 2/3 of really good baseball with Norfolk. And right now, a key part of the Orioles pitching staff as they make the push for the playoffs, and a guy that I think you could at least pencil in for a rotation spot in 2025. What did you guys see from him at AAA that allowed him to be successful the second time around?
steal Bob's answer that he had with McDermott, it was a consistency. I think we talked about that specifically as what we wanted to see more than anything with him at the end of the last season, because he would have those starts in 2023 when he was in Norfolk where he goes through that first inning, he looks like an ace, swing and miss stuff, 3 up, 3 down, real quick, couple strikeouts and a ground out. And then the second inning, he gives up 6 runs on 6 hits, 5 of them are home runs. And it's like, what is going on? He was so up and down. And this year, it was from the jump. He had a couple blips on the radar, but the walks were much better, more swing and miss, more strikeout stuff. It's, I think a lot of people, especially when Povich struggled early in the majors, I don't think, I think a lot of people had higher expectations for Povich when I think he's doing exactly what I had hoped he would be doing in the major leagues right now. Like I've always envisioned Povich as this guy who could be a really solid 4 or 5 for you. He's going to get roughed up some nights, but when he's on, he's on. As long as he can continue to pound the strike zone, he's going to be an effective pitcher for you. It's the velo may not be there. Some of the traits that successful pitchers have may not be there, but he makes it work with his super deep arsenal. I don't know. I think he's going to be a solid 4 or 5 in this rotation for a couple more years to come. He may not have the ceiling that McDermott does, but he's showing right now, as we talked about recently, his last 5-6 starts in the majors, those strikeout numbers have been phenomenal. And I think he's got a little bit more juice that we can tap into over the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a 6-pitch mix. All 6 of his pitches he threw 8% or more. I mean, that's going to take longer to develop. He's more, like you said, less stuff, more just pitch mix and putting a game plan together and been able to land a curveball. And I just think he's a guy that, and all of our pitching prospects have Bradish, Rodriguez. They've needed time to adjust, and I think he has. I think it's underreported the amount of progress he's made as the season went on. Over his last 7 starts, 36 and 2/3 innings, 4.91 ERA, but 42 strikeouts to 10 walks, FIP of 3.55. So that sounds good. But then his last 4, if you take it down to just September starts, 22 innings, 3.27 ERA, 3.17 FIP, 2.91 xFIP, 30 strikeouts to 7 walks. Yeah, he's getting there. I think it's a little under the radar. I think I would be shocked if he's not in the rotation to start next year, just because he's, let's see, how many total innings does he have in the majors? I'm looking at it. It's 74 innings, and he'll probably get another start, so close to 80 innings this year in the majors. I think that's way more than we would have expected coming into the year, and said as much on preview episodes. So great development season for Cade Povich.
Nick talked about how this season probably allowed us to figure things out about some position players at Norfolk. And you could say that that was true to an extent about the pitching staff as well, because there were some hurdlers, especially out of the bullpen, that struggled a little bit more than we expected. Wanderson Charles, who looked like he was going to be possibly a breakout story, ended up really struggling with the Tides. 25 and 2/3 innings, walked 28 batters, posted an 8.42 ERA, clearly showing that the command issues were not something he was going to be able to overcome in the organization. But then on the flip side, you had Nolan Hoffman put together another really nice year. Trey Mago gave them a lot of good innings out of the bullpen before he was flipped in the Eloy Jimenez trade with the White Sox. Then you also have Justin Armbruster, who had, for my money, one of the more bizarre seasons of any prospect in recent memory, because he comes out after another really solid year in 2023, throwing harder, but the results were much worse than what we've seen in the past. Bad first half, and then goes out in the month of July, dominates, looks like he's starting to get back to his old form, only to really struggle in August and be slightly better in September, but still not the Justin Armbruster we saw in 2022 or 2023. And then you also had some guys that have good stuff, but that were roughed up a little bit by AAA hitters out of the bullpen, whether that's Carlos Tavera or Cade Stroud. There's a lot of takeaways we could have, good and bad, from the rest of Norfolk's pitching staff, but what in that jumps out, and I do actually want to focus on Armbruster for a moment because we've been high on Armbruster for a while. He had his moments this year, but overall it was a tough season.
Yeah, I'd love to know what the team ERA was without him in the mix because he threw a lot of innings in a 7.5 ERA there. Yeah, that's pretty rough. Wipe the slate clean, give him another chance in 2025 and see what you have. But very disappointing. Real quick on Cade Stroud. Underreported again last 2 months for him. He might have started to figure something out at AAA. I know it was terrible overall numbers and had a really, really rough stretch soon after being promoted there. But over the last 2 months of the season, in 20 and a third innings, he had a 3.10 ERA, 2.98 FIP, struck out 33% of batters. So maybe still hope for the 27-year-old relief prospect because the stuff is there. It's just a matter of putting it together. But yeah, Justin Armbruster, maybe next year he's the guy they turn into the bullpen. Just turn him over as a reliever and see what he can do because I don't know, even if he could eat the innings, I don't know if a 7.5 ERA is going to cut it at this level.
Yeah, Cade Stroud, I feel like that was his story last year too. It was god awful, and then he turned it on at the end of the year. Like, turn it on sooner, and you might get to the major leagues. I also want to before I go into my arm booster thing, we got to shout out Luis Gonzalez. Like, how do we not see this guy make any major league appearances this season? I do kind of get it because you keep finding that the Colin Selbys and guys like that who have more explosive stuff. They're younger, more explosive arms, but still, it's like Gonzalez used to be a top 30 prospect in this system. He was here from 2013 to 2019, hadn't pitched in the U.S. since 2021, pitched fully healthy out of Norfolk's bullpen all year with a 29% strikeout rate and a walk rate under 5%. ERA was 4.5, but that was below league average, which was like 4.9 this year, I think, when I looked earlier. The FIP was a run lower than that. It just kind of, I don't think he has like a future role on this team. I just think it sucks that we didn't get to see him. He's yet to make his major league debut. He's about to be 33, and he's had like a 14-year pitching career in professional baseball. I wanted to see him make his big league debut. Even if it's get the big league debut, you add him to the 40-man, and then you got a DFA him and he's gone. That was unfortunate. But yeah, with Armbruster, like, I don't think nothing really changed from the last time we talked about him, in my opinion. He did flash a couple outings down the stretch, but the walk rate was like 12% this year. That was rough. The home run rate skyrocketed. He can eat innings, like Bob mentioned. He did have decent swing and miss stuff. Maybe he is more effective out of that relief role. Coming into the year, I really loved the data on a lot of his pitches, especially the fastball. It just never got it going for him this year. I think he is Rule 5 eligible as well this offseason. It's very easy to see, like, leave him unprotected and he stays in the org next year after not being selected. And I think that's probably what happens. But I was thinking about it, like, maybe if the Orioles are still believers in Armbruster and they think they can unlock a little bit more and he can have some role moving forward, I mean, do they protect him just to be completely safe? And then, like, they DFA him later, like in spring training, and try to sneak him through waivers to get him back in the org and maybe try to punt that decision a few more months down the road. I don't know, but it's unfortunate that after what he showed in 2023, that this is where we're at with him now at the end of 2024.
You know, that Rule 5 scenario, I don't think he gets protected, but I also don't think it's that far-fetched that the Orioles decide to give him a spot. You know, it could be kind of a Logan Gillespie situation from a few years ago where, yeah, maybe the results aren't great, but we really like the stuff. And we do feel like another organization is going to take him if we leave him unprotected. And, you know, again, I don't think that he would be taken by another team and then he would have to stick if he is taken by that team. It's a separate question in and of itself. But I also don't think it's far-fetched that some organization has enough data on Armbruster that they think, okay, we'll take him. We like these traits. We'll bury him in the bullpen all of 2024. And if he posts a 5 ERA over 70 innings of relief work, what does it matter? At least we've got him in the org now. We can work with him and figure out how to get better results from him. That's what it would take. And I don't think it's likely, but it's also not that far-fetched. And then for Stroud, I'll just say this. I feel like Nick was just talking about what Cade Povic's season at Norfolk looked like in 2023, where he could have outings where he looked dominant one inning, would struggle in the next, or he could put together a couple of good starts only to have it followed up with one that was just disastrous. I kind of feel like that's where Stroud was this year. He's a one inning reliever, pure 3-out guy, and that's fine. He's got the stuff to do that. But he could put together 3 or 4 really good outings in a row. And then he would have this one outing in there where things would just go off the rails. Not getting the strikeouts, walking too many guys, giving up a lot of hits. And next thing you know, he's giving up multiple runs in an inning of work or less than an inning of work. And what I think happened is that as the year went along and he got down into the final 2 months of the season, he was more successful in avoiding those. So the consistency was there. And if you want to look at a silver lining from his season, yes, the overall numbers aren't great, but the consistency started to show itself at the end of the year when it hadn't before.
Agree. I think there's going to be some interesting arms. I know the general consensus was Norfolk bullpen was hot garbage, but I think there were some bright spots. And I think I wouldn't be shocked if the organization sees a few brighter spots as well. So Nick Vespi. No, we can wrap it up. It's done.
You mean you don't want to have that debate for the 85th time? Why they bring him up and not leave him up?
It's almost 11 o'clock at night. I don't want to talk about Nick Vespi. Sorry, Nick.
Question might have been answered this year. I don't know. Solid arm to have his depth for sure.
Yep.
And with that, that does it for this week's episode. We will have more info on next week's show. As we get closer to that, we'll have to see how things play out with the Orioles. We might be previewing the playoffs. We'll determine the night that we're on when we get closer to that and we know exactly what we're going to be breaking down. So look for that, and you can find that in many different places on the internet, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing the internet, be sure to sign up and become a member of our Patreon community. We will have exclusive content well into the off season and perhaps a little bit during the postseason too. And don't forget to mark your calendars for October 14th. We will be at Checker Spot Brewing Company, located not far from Camden Yards in Baltimore, for our second live show of the 2024 season. That will begin at 6 p.m. We love hanging out at Checker Spot. Always a good time. We hope to see you there. They're located at 1421 Ridgely Street in Baltimore. And once again, that is October 14th, a Monday at 6 p.m. Connor Newcomb, who was on our show earlier this week, will be on. We have him penciled in for that. And we look forward to announcing more guests here in the coming weeks. For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spett. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.